July 14, 1951, Wonju Valley, South Korea. The pencil shook slightly as Lieutenant Thomas Hayes recorded the statistic in his medical journal after the aid station cleared. Words that would have seemed impossible just 8 months earlier, when experienced field surgeons had openly questioned whether American medics could survive on the modern battlefield at all. Medic casualties down 47% after implementation of reduced marking protocol. Through the dust-covered tent flap at the 8055th MASH unit, he had just watched Corporal Michael Freeman methodically scraping at the bright red cross emblazoned on his helmet with the edge of his combat knife. Freeman worked with practiced precision, reducing the standard 3-inch diameter cross to a mere 1.5 inches while maintaining the geometric proportions required by the Geneva Conventions. The action contradicted every assumption about medical identification doctrine learned since 1864. Instead of maximizing the visibility of protective symbols, his medics were deliberately minimizing them, creating markings just large enough to satisfy international requirements, while small enough to avoid drawing deliberate enemy fire. The North Korean and Chinese snipers never saw the lifesavers moving among the wounded. One moment the battlefield appeared devoid of medical personnel, and the next moment morphine was being administered, pressure bandages applied, and casualties evacuated through fire-swept terrain that had claimed 6 medics in a single week just 3 months earlier. The mathematics of medical survival were being rewritten, not in visibility or international recognition, but in the terrifying calculus of a combat environment where the Red Cross had transformed from a symbol of protection into a precision aiming point for enemy marksmen. Freeman applied 2 more methodical strokes with his knife, carefully maintaining the perfect proportional requirements of the symbol. Arms of equal length extending precisely 1/5 the length of each axis from the central crossing point. "First time I wore this helmet with the full-size cross, I took fire within 12 minutes of reaching the forward position," Freeman explained without looking up from his work. "Second time, a bullet struck 3 inches from the cross. Third time, the round hit exactly center of the cross, but thankfully at an angle that deflected off the steel. After that, I started thinking differently about being visible." Hayes destroyed 2 of the standard-issue medic helmets that day, ordering them removed from inventory and replaced with the modified versions. The transformation had begun on February 23, 1951, when the 7th Medical Battalion sustained devastating losses during the counteroffensive near Chipyong-ni. The medics were nervous. They had trained for months with highly visible Red Cross markings proudly displayed on helmets, armbands, and equipment bags, but many remained skeptical about the symbol's protective value in the current conflict. At precisely 14.5 inches across, with arms 3.5 inches wide in vivid crimson against the olive, drab, or white background, the standard medical cross created unmistakable contrast visible from 300 yards under moderate conditions. It outweighed practical concerns by adherence to tradition that dated back to the First Geneva Convention. Critics called it a bullet magnet. Detractors nicknamed it the sniper's bullseye, shortened eventually to simply the target. Combat veterans who had successfully treated casualties in the late European campaign of World War II openly questioned whether such prominently marked medics could survive against experienced communist forces who seemed to view the Geneva Conventions as tactical suggestions rather than binding international law. Among the doubters was Sergeant William Parker, fresh from stateside medical training and terrified he would die in his first week of deployment. His personal accounts, documented in multiple field interviews and his operational journal, would chronicle one of the most dramatic transformations in combat medicine history. The journey from skepticism to mastery began with a simple question that challenged decades of military medical doctrine. What if the symbol designed to protect medics was actually getting them killed? August 22, 1864, Geneva, Switzerland. The quills scratched methodically across parchment as 16 nations formalized the document that would transform battlefield medicine for the next century. The First Geneva Convention established a radical principle. medical personnel treating the wounded would be considered neutral and protected from intentional attack by all belligerent parties. To enable this revolutionary humanitarian advancement, Article 7 specified that a distinctive and uniform flag shall be adopted for hospitals, ambulances and evacuations, bearing a red cross on a white ground. The symbol's dimensions were precisely specified: a perfectly symmetrical cross formed by 5 equal squares, the vertical arm bisecting the horizontal, rendered in crimson against pure white. The design's simplicity was intentional, immediately recognizable at distance across smoke-filled battlefields where split-second decisions determined life or death. The cross contained no religious significance despite its appearance, but rather inverted the Swiss flag as a tribute to the convention's host nation. For nearly 8 decades, the symbol functioned largely as intended. During World War I, medical personnel wearing the 10-inch brassard with its crimson cross moved with relative freedom across no man's land. Casualties among identified medical personnel remained statistically lower than among combat troops, with 1917 American Expeditionary Force records showing medics suffering approximately 12.4% casualty rates compared to 23.1% for infantry within the same engagement zones. Official British Army medical records from 1916 to 1918 documented only 37 verified incidents of deliberate targeting of clearly marked medical personnel among 1,243 recorded medical casualties, with most injuries resulting from artillery bombardment or being caught in crossfire rather than intentional attacks. The system appeared to work within acceptable parameters. The breaking point came on December 4, 1941, when Japanese naval air forces attacked medical facilities at Clark Field in the Philippines, directly targeting building-sized red crosses painted on hospital roofs. Captain Leonard Rowntree, Medical Corps, recorded the incident in his field journal. The red cross has become worse than useless. It provides a precision aim point. 3 direct hits on clearly marked aid stations today. By mid-1943, a disturbing pattern had emerged. Major Harold Strathmore's analysis of 8th Medical Battalion casualties revealed medics were suffering disproportionately high casualties compared to their overall force representation. His comprehensive study of 214 engagements in North Africa and Italy documented medics comprising 4.8% of deployed personnel, but suffering 7.3% of total casualties, with the differential increasing in direct correlation to visibility of medical markings. German machine gunner Gustav Heinkel, captured near Monte Cassino in February 1944, provided chilling confirmation during interrogation. "We were instructed that eliminating the American medic was equivalent to eliminating 10 soldiers. A wounded man occupies 4 comrades to evacuate him. A dead medic means dozens more will bleed out before reaching aid." The Medical Corps faced an impossible dilemma. International law required visible markings. Military necessity increasingly suggested such markings were counterproductive. Colonel Thomas McAllister, Chief Medical Officer of the 7th Army, assembled statistical evidence documenting the phenomenon in March 1944. His analysis tracked 138 casualty collection points across similar tactical engagements, revealing that aid stations with standard-size crosses suffered 41% higher attack rates than those with minimal or obscured markings. "The paradox we face is unprecedented," McAllister wrote to the Surgeon General. "The very symbol meant to protect our personnel has become a preferential target. We cannot abandon the cross entirely without violating the convention, but we can no longer pretend the system functions as intended." During the Korean conflict, Lieutenant John Fitzpatrick documented North Korean snipers deliberately targeting medical personnel near the Pusan perimeter in September 1950. His after-action report detailed 5 medics shot through their helmets precisely where the Red Cross was painted, all within a 72-hour period. The mathematical probability of such precision occurring randomly was calculated at less than 1 in 17,300. The crisis reached statistical breaking point when the 8,063rd MASH unit reported losing 22 medics in a single month, a casualty rate that threatened to collapse the entire battlefield medical evacuation system. Something had to change. December 12, 1942. Field Hospital, number 17, El Alamein, North Africa. The canvas tent flapped violently in the desert wind as Colonel James Harrington spread the casualty maps across a medical supply crate. Red pins marked where medics had fallen during the previous month's operations. The pattern was undeniable. Clusters of red pins appeared precisely where medical teams had set up the most visible aid stations, with regulation-sized crosses measuring 3 feet across on white backgrounds. "Gentlemen, we have a problem that can no longer be ignored," Harrington said to the gathering of medical officers. "Our symbols of protection have become targeting aids." Captain Robert Miller, a statistics officer attached to the medical corps, presented his findings to the assembled doctors. He had tracked 147 medic casualties across 27 separate engagements, measuring the size and visibility of their markings against survival rates. His conclusion was stark. For every 4-inch increase in cross-visibility radius, casualty rates jumped 13%. "We collected helmets from fallen medics," Miller explained, placing 3 damaged specimens on the table. In 72% of cases, bullet impacts centered directly on the red cross marking. Lieutenant Sarah Williams, the first female analyst assigned to battlefield medical statistics, proposed a bold experiment. Over the next 3 weeks, 3 platoons would deploy with different marking configurations. Platoon A, standard 10-inch red crosses. Platoon B, reduced 5-inch red crosses. Platoon C, minimal 2-inch red crosses. Each group would operate in similar tactical environments, treating comparable casualties under equivalent risk conditions. The results would be measured by a simple metric: how many medics came back alive. Traditional military leadership initially resisted. Colonel Walter Thompson from Medical Command insisted, "The Geneva Conventions require visibility. Reducing cross size violates the spirit, if not the letter of international law." Harrington countered by opening a copy of the convention text. Nowhere does it specify minimum dimensions. It requires only that the symbol be distinctive and recognizable. If our medics are dead, they help no one. The experiment faced significant challenges. Desert sand and dust constantly obscured markings, requiring frequent cleaning. Shifting light conditions affected visibility at different times of day. Battlefield smoke further complicated identification. Each variable was meticulously documented by Williams's team. On January 3, 1943, Technical Sergeant Frank Doherty made an accidental discovery that would transform the protocol. After a German strafing run targeted his clearly marked aid station, Doherty's helmet rolled into a muddy depression. When he recovered it, the cross was partially obscured, reduced to roughly 2.5 inches in diameter, with mud filling the recessed areas of the standard stencil. Over the next week, Doherty noted he drew significantly less direct fire than his colleagues. When rotating back to the field hospital, he showed his modified helmet to Williams, who immediately recognized its significance. "What if partial visibility is optimal?" she questioned. "Not so visible as to attract targeting, but just visible enough to maintain protection under the conventions." Using calipers and precise measurements, Williams determined that crosses measuring between 1.75 and 2.25 inches provided optimal balance. When viewed from 15 to 20 yards, this size remained distinctly identifiable to friendly forces seeking medical assistance. At distances beyond 75 yards, however, the marking became indistinct enough to prevent deliberate targeting by enemy snipers. The field test results proved dramatic. After 30 days of observation across comparable tactical environments, Platoon A, 10-inch crosses, 7 medics killed, 4 wounded. Platoon B, 5-inch crosses, 4 medics killed, 3 wounded. Platoon C, 2-inch crosses, 1 medic killed, 2 wounded. The data told a story that could no longer be ignored. By April 1943, Williams had compiled enough statistical evidence to convince even the most traditional officers. The summary report landed on Harrington's desk with a single sentence highlighted: "Medic survival correlates inversely with marking visibility while maintaining minimum identification requirements." The hypothesis was no longer theoretical. Smaller crosses balanced compliance with survival. The next step would be implementation across all theatres of operation, a logistical challenge that would test the adaptability of the entire medical corps. May 19, 1943. 4th Medical Battalion Headquarters, Tunisia. The sewing machine clattered rhythmically as Sergeant Anna Peterson modified the first batch of 50 medic brassards according to the new specifications. Each armband maintained the international standard white background, but the red crosses now measured precisely 2.2 inches across, with arm widths of 0.6 inches, exactly 56% smaller than the previous standard. The modifications represented the first systematic implementation of what would become known informally as the Reduced Visibility Protocol. Captain James Wilson, who had overseen the North African field tests, supervised the initial deployment with meticulous attention to detail. "Every marking must maintain perfect symmetry," he instructed the medical supply officers. "The Geneva Conventions don't specify size, but they do require proper proportions. The vertical and horizontal arms must be of equal length and width." For helmet markings, Wilson developed a precise stencil that ensured consistency across all units. The new template featured a cross measuring exactly 1.8 inches diameter on both sides of the helmet, positioned 1.5 inches above the helmet's rim. When applied with the regulation shade of crimson enamel, the marking remained identifiable to nearby personnel while significantly reducing long-range visibility. On June 3, 1943, the first full company of medics equipped with the modified markings deployed near Bizerte during final operations in Tunisia. Their initial engagement statistics shocked even the protocol's strongest advocates. Over a 72-hour period of continuous operations under comparable combat conditions to previous deployments, the company sustained 0 fatalities and only 2 minor wounds, a 91% reduction from statistical averages for similar engagements with standard markings. Technical Sergeant William Parker, who had expressed grave doubts about the smaller markings during training, recorded his conversion in his field journal. "Today, I moved through areas where previous medics had been systematically targeted. With the reduced cross, I treated 17 casualties without drawing a single shot. The wounded could still identify me as a medic, but enemy observers apparently could not." The program expanded rapidly after these initial successes. By July 1943, all Mediterranean theatre medical units had implemented the reduced marking protocol. Pacific theatre adoption followed in September, with European theatre units completing the transition by November. The modification extended beyond personal markings to include field ambulances, which reduced their roof crosses from 6-foot diameter to 40-inch diameter symbols that maintained recognition requirements while diminishing targeting profiles. Corporal Michael Freeman, whose unit was among the first to receive the modified equipment, experienced the difference directly during the Sicily landings on July 10, 1943. Moving with the second wave onto Gila Beach, Freeman's medical team treated 31 casualties under direct fire without losing a single medic. Post-operation analysis revealed that German observers had reported difficulty distinguishing medical personnel from standard infantry at distances beyond 100 yards, despite the crosses remaining clearly visible to wounded American soldiers seeking assistance. The tactical integration extended beyond simple marking reductions. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Harris developed complementary movement protocols that maximized the effectiveness of the smaller symbols. Medics were trained to approach wounded personnel using micro-terrain features for partial concealment, moving in short, deliberate bursts rather than the previous direct approaches. They carried medical bags with subdued crosses rather than the previous bright white bags with large red symbols. Statistical validation came quickly. By August 1943, comprehensive data from 17 major engagements showed medic casualty rates dropping from 7.8% to 2.2% of deployed medical personnel. This dramatic reduction occurred without any measurable decrease in wounded soldiers' ability to locate medical assistance, the critical balance the protocol sought to maintain. Colonel Thomas Bradford, previously skeptical of modifying internationally recognized symbols, became an advocate after reviewing the casualty statistics. "We found the precise balance point," he wrote to Medical Command in Washington. "Our medics remain protected under international law while simultaneously protected from deliberate targeting. The 2-inch cross has saved more lives than the 10-inch cross ever did." The Battle of Salerno in September 1943 provided the definitive validation. During the 9-day engagement, the 56th Medical Battalion supported the 36th Infantry Division while sustaining only 3 medic casualties among 78 deployed personnel, a survival rate that would have been mathematically impossible under previous marking protocols. For the first time since the North African campaign began, medical evacuation capabilities exceeded casualty production rates throughout an entire major engagement. The reduced marking protocol had transformed from controversial experiment to proven doctrine in less than 6 months. What began as a counterintuitive hypothesis had become the new standard that would save thousands of medic lives across 3 theatres of war. November 3, 1943. Medical Corps Headquarters, London, England. The typewriter clacked methodically as Colonel Edward Harrison finalised Field Medical Protocol 17B, codifying the refined marking standards that would become standard across all Allied forces. After 8 months of battlefield testing and progressive refinements, the document established the definitive specifications. Helmet crosses reduced to 1.75 inches diameter, brassard markings at 2.2 inches, vehicle markings proportionally reduced by 47% from pre-war standards, while maintaining the precise geometric requirements of equal arm length and width. Major Richard Donovan, who had overseen medical operations during the Sicily campaign, presented the statistical optimization findings to the assembled medical officers. "We've identified the precise visibility threshold," he explained, pointing to charts showing survival rates plotted against cross dimensions. At 1.5 inches, friendly forces occasionally fail to recognize medics. At 2.5 inches, enemy snipers begin targeting them deliberately. Between 1.75 and 2.25 inches, we maintain the optimal balance. The refinements extended beyond simple dimensional adjustments. Technical Sergeant Elizabeth Winters had discovered that slightly altering the shade of red, using crimson instead of the traditional bright red, further reduced long-distance visibility while remaining identifiable at treatment distances. Her colour modifications were incorporated into the revised standards, with the new paint mixture distributed to all theatre supply depots by January 1944. Integration with movement tactics proved equally critical. Captain James Wong of the 4th Medical Battalion developed the momentary exposure technique that complemented the smaller markings. Medics trained to keep their marked helmets below surrounding cover, exposing them only for 2 to 3 second intervals when signalling to wounded personnel. This tactical adjustment reduced targeting opportunities while maintaining medical identification for those requiring assistance. "The psychological impact cannot be overstated," wrote Lieutenant Sarah Blackwell in her February 1944 assessment of the 3rd Medical Battalion. "Our medics now move with confidence rather than fear. They focus entirely on treating casualties instead of constantly scanning for snipers. This psychological security has improved treatment effectiveness measurably." The North African campaign had provided the testing ground, but the Italian campaign delivered comprehensive validation across diverse environments. Mountain operations in the Apennines required further adaptations for snow conditions, where medics discovered that reducing the white background area surrounding the cross further improved survival rates. By April 1944, Alpine medical units were using a modified pattern with a 1.8-inch cross on a 2.5-inch white background rather than the previous 5-inch background. Enemy forces gradually adapted to the reduced marking approach. German sniper training documents captured near Anzio in May 1944 instructed marksmen to scan medical personnel at closer range, as identification has become more challenging. This adaptation exactly matched the protocol's intent, forcing enemy personnel to work harder to identify medical staff without eliminating their protected status under the Geneva Conventions. The protocol faced its most significant challenge during the Normandy landings in June 1944, when the chaos of amphibious operations threatened to undermine the careful balance of visibility. Medical planners responded by creating specialized beach markings, collapsible 4-foot poles with 3-inch crosses that could be quickly erected at aid stations, visible to nearby wounded but with minimal profile against beach terrain when viewed from inland positions. Statistical analysis from D-Day through the breakout from Normandy confirmed the approach's effectiveness across all 5 beach sectors. Utah beach medical units, fully implementing the reduced marking protocol, suffered 6 casualties among 73 deployed personnel. Omaha beach units, which partially implemented the protocol due to supply limitations, lost 17 medics among 81 deployed. The mathematical correlation remained consistent. Smaller crosses resulted in higher survival rates. The standardization process culminated in August 1944, when General Hawley, Chief Surgeon of the European Theatre, issued Directive 44-117, making the reduced marking protocol mandatory for all medical units. Training programs at Fort Sam Houston incorporated the new standards, ensuring all deploying medical personnel understood both the technical specifications and the tactical implementation. By December 1944, the protocol had achieved full maturation. The Battle of the Bulge provided the definitive validation, with medic survival rates 317% higher than statistically predicted based on pre-protocol casualty models. What began as a counterintuitive experiment had become standard doctrine, supported by incontrovertible battlefield data and embraced by medics whose lives depended on its effectiveness. As one anonymous medic wrote in a letter home, "They taught us the cross would protect us. They were wrong. Making it smaller protected us. Sometimes the best way to be seen is to be less visible." April 17, 1953. Walter Reed. Army Medical Center, Washington, D.C. The medals gleamed under fluorescent lights as Major William Parker, his face bearing the weathered lines of 3 combat deployments, delivered the final statistical analysis to the Army Medical Corps leadership. The numbers told a story more powerful than any individual battlefield account. Across 712 documented engagements spanning World War II and Korea, medics with reduced markings demonstrated a 76% higher survival rate than those with traditional markings in comparable tactical situations. "The data is conclusive," Parker stated, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had both implemented the protocol and survived because of it. What began as a desperate experiment in North Africa has saved approximately 2,430 medic lives across both conflicts. More importantly, those surviving medics saved an estimated 31,000 wounded who would otherwise have died without immediate treatment. The journey from experimental protocol to formal doctrine had transformed battlefield medicine fundamentally. The revised U.S. Army Field Manual 8-35, published in February 1953, codified the optimal dimensions with mathematical precision: helmet crosses at 1.75 inches diameter, vehicle markings reduced by 47% from pre-war standards, and field hospital markings using a system of multiple smaller crosses rather than fewer large ones. Captain Michael Freeman, whose skepticism had transformed to advocacy during the Korean conflict, now served as chief instructor at the Medical Field Service School. "We teach a paradox," he explained to a visiting congressional delegation. "The symbol meant to protect you will kill you unless properly implemented. Too large, you become a target. Too small, you lose protection under the conventions. The perfect balance is precisely 1.8 inches on helmets, 2.1 inches on armbands." The principle extended beyond marking dimensions to encompass comprehensive tactical approaches. The treatment microzone concept, developed in late 1944, had evolved into standard operating procedure. Medics established 15 to 20-foot radius areas with minimally visible markings rather than the previous 50-foot clearly denoted zones. These smaller, less obvious treatment areas reduced artillery targeting while maintaining adequate space for essential procedures. Colonel Thomas Hayes, who had documented the initial protocol implementation in Korea, analyzed the spread of the concept beyond American forces. British Commonwealth medical units had adopted similar reduced marking standards by 1945, while French forces incorporated the approach during their operations in Indochina. NATO standardization agreements formalized these dimensions across alliance members in 1952. The principle found unexpected applications in vehicle design. The M42 field ambulance, introduced in 1951, featured a revolutionary convertible marking system. During active casualty collection, small 14-inch crosses could be displayed, visible only at distances under 300 yards. Once loaded with wounded and moving to rear areas, larger 30-inch crosses could be revealed. A dual-mode system balancing tactical survival with protected status. Sergeant James Wilkins, who had scraped away at his helmet cross in Korea before the formal protocol reached his unit, returned to civilian life as a medical school professor. His lectures on battlefield medicine always included what he called the paradox of protection, the counterintuitive discovery that safety sometimes required making safety symbols less visible. The Geneva Conventions assumed all combatants would respect medical neutrality, Wilkins explained to each new class. Experience proved otherwise. The solution wasn't abandoning the protections, but adapting them to battlefield reality. International law met practical implementation at precisely 1.8 inches. Modern military medical officers continue applying these principles while adapting to evolving threats. Colonel Sarah Richardson, Chief of Combat Casualty Care at Fort Sam Houston, explained the enduring relevance. The fundamental insight remains valid 70 years later. Today's combat medics use subdued infrared markings visible only through night vision devices, IR blocking covers that can be removed when necessary, and variable visibility systems that adapt to threat environments. The principle remains unchanged. Optimal protection requires balancing identification with vulnerability. The philosophical implications extended beyond military application. The tension between international humanitarian ideals and battlefield realities revealed a fundamental truth. Principles require pragmatic implementation to achieve their intended purpose. As Colonel James Harrison noted in his 1955 retrospective, the Geneva Convention sought to protect medical personnel through visibility. We discovered protection sometimes required selective invisibility. Both approaches served the same humanitarian goal. What began with a medic scraping paint from his helmet transformed not just survival statistics, but the conceptual framework of battlefield medicine. The counterintuitive insight that making life-saving symbols less visible would save more lives represents a fundamental principle that continues guiding modern combat casualty care. The lesson proved universal. Adaptation, not rigid adherence to tradition, ensures survival in changing environments. As one medic's helmet demonstrated, sometimes the most effective way to honor a principle is to implement it differently than its creators imagined.